or you have to fight to be able to show that you're strong enough, even though there may be a man that's exactly your size doing that exact same job with potentially less experience. I've been asked so many times when I was in research or academia whether I was the assistant. We're in a time of immense change. We're in a climate and biodiversity crisis. We really need collaboration to solve these issues. And there's a lot of research around the fact that women are really effective collaborators and communicators.
Hello, and welcome to the Ocean News podcast. I'm Eva Cahill, the editorial assistant here at Oceanographic. Last week, we celebrated International Women and Girls in STEM Day, and to explore the topic further, we're launching a mini-series of interviews with 3 women working in the marine science sector. STEM communities have historically been overwhelmingly male, and despite progress, that imbalance remains. In the UK, less than 1/3 of the STEM workforce is female. Marine research and ocean science are no exception. When the HMS Challenger, the very first scientific oceanographic expedition, set sail in 1872, there were 243 people on board. Not one of them was a woman. Of course, much has changed since then, but globally, women still make up just 37% of the ocean science workforce. So, we wanted to speak directly to women working in the field today, each at different stages of their careers, to explore the strengths women bring to marine science, the challenges they face, and the advice they would give to the next generation. Our first guest is marine ecologist George Short, who works on kelp recovery with the Sussex Wildlife Trust. As the youngest of our interviewees, she offers a thoughtful perspective on what it's like to have started a career in marine research as a young woman in the 2010s. We spoke about cultural differences in fieldwork around the world, the persistent underrepresentation of women in leadership roles, and the pressure many women feel to overachieve in order to be taken seriously. I found it to be a really fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, so I guess off the bat, if we just start talking about your experiences and kind of how you found being a woman in the space.
Yeah, so I am a marine ecologist. I worked in research, so in academia, and now I work in conservation across kind of connecting up policy, conservation and research to kind of work all together and to bridge the gaps between them. My experience has been really positive in marine science, but there are definitely things we can improve. Having worked all across the world, you really see the differences in different regions, in how women are respected in ocean science and how they are treated when working on boats in different regions. So it's a really, I think, region specific kind of experience, but it's been overall really positive, and I think we're on a positive trajectory, but there are definitely some steps that we still need to take.
I'm interested in talking about field working on boats. What's been your personal experience with that?
Boat work in general is dominated by men, so being at sea has inherent risks for the safety of women. When you're in an isolated situation that's male dominated, you might be the only woman on a boat, so there are inherent considerations for that. And then aside from kind of the safety issues, the barriers from my perspective have been not being allowed to get involved as much. So anything that involves physical strength, not being given the opportunity to pull up equipment from the seabed, raise anchors, all of that kind of thing. Even if you're perfectly capable and strong enough, you would never be given that opportunity in a lot of spaces, or you have to fight to be able to show that you're strong enough, even though, there may be a man that's exactly your size doing that exact same job with potentially less experience working on boats. So there's always a really strong push in our field to have to prove yourself as a woman, I think.
That's obviously maybe the more practical side, but you spoke about working in academic and research circles. And I was reading about a leaky pipeline of women being overrepresented in graduate studies. And then as the careers go on to more of a leadership and people go to higher levels, that representation falls off. And what's your experience of that been, and what's your sense of why that is?
That's definitely my experience. It's a really female dominated field, kind of at entry point, but not as many women make it kind of those higher up positions. I think that's less so the case in conservation, but in academia for sure. If I'm really honest, I think women are still not respected and listened to as much for their scientific knowledge or experience, and I don't think that's conscious. I think that is genuinely a subconscious thing or an unconscious bias. And so people are given opportunities, not consciously or not, because of their gender, or at least that factor plays into where they're given opportunities. And you definitely see that in meetings, that people will respect the opinions of male researchers over female researchers.
I mean, it doesn't actually surprise me either. I feel like it's quite a common experience outside of like even just STEM fields. So I was reading some stats about it being harder for a woman to have their paper actually published. I don't know much about how academic papers are published. Is it a case of it comes across someone's desk and they see a name, or is it there a process of like face-to-face interactions? And how does female identity interact with that process of being published?
It's not something I know a lot about, so I'm conscious of giving too much of a strong opinion on it, but I don't think it would be at the point of crossing the editor or the reviewer's desk, because there is an amount of anonymity there. I don't think it's likely. Usually you only have the first initial of your first name published. So I think that's unlikely. I would imagine that it's more because of the barriers you face to get to the point of publication. So kind of that equity versus equality issue of the barriers faced to get there. But there's definitely something around not even being considered a scientist or a researcher in those spaces that you need to be in to get yourself published. So an example of that would be, I've been asked so many times when I was in research or academia whether I was the assistant of the researcher. And even after explaining, no, that's me. And to be fair, it's misleading because my name is George. So, that is a fair assumption to think that I wasn't George because I'm a woman. So when I've explained that, no, that's me, they say, I've been asked again, oh, are you the assistant? And I've explained again, no, I'm the researcher, I'm George. And then I've had responses like, no, there must be a confusion because George is a scientist here.
What? That's so
Yeah.
mad. So is that okay? I guess in my head when I'm thinking of these problems, it's like there's an overhang of attitudes that kind of structurally are impacting the space. But that seems like it's quite an active, maybe not conscious, but like an active interaction you're having where you're experiencing this bias. Is that something that still characterizes the space in your day to day?
In UK marine conservation spaces, I think that's less so, but in academia, for sure. And certainly probably conservation outside of the UK as well, in other regions, I imagine people still experience that.
And where do you think the change can come from?
I think there's a lot of education, structural and systematic change that's needed around the culture of these spaces. It's really hard to change them from the inside as one person. It's possible. And I think there is a pressure that we feel as women to keep proving ourselves and hoping that the example of us doing well or trying our best, succeeding as much as we can, will change other people's minds. But ultimately those unconscious biases exist, and we need education and cultural change within those systems.
It does feel like a bit of it's not a trap, but the idea that you have to like overprove yourself to be measured on the same standard as someone else. But then because there's no change coming from above, we're just setting basically in a higher intensity of work, getting less compensation for it.
And it's exhausting.
I can imagine. And so when you're going to conferences and stuff, what are the different proportions of gender there? What are those?
I think at conferences it's still pretty balanced in marine spaces, because there are so many graduates that attend, and postgraduate students and things that attend conferences. So for that reason, it's pretty balanced. But if you then look at the keynote speakers, there will be a heavy male sway. And that is to some extent because the people that have had these long tenures in this field and can talk about whole lifetimes of work in their keynote, are men. So there are people that are less available. So I think it really requires, and this is what I mean about cultural change and needing education about unconscious bias, is the people in those positions of power or those organizational positions need to make a conscious choice to give opportunities to people that maybe aren't as qualified, haven't had as much experience. But without doing that, we won't make a change to a more equitable field.
No, that completely makes sense. Obviously, I think there's been quite a lot coming out on research on female health hasn't been as much of a priority in other fields because the bias has been skewed towards male subjects and male issues. How can women kind of contribute to the space in a way that maybe men can't? Is that something that applies to marine science?
I think it really applies in a lot of ways. And the main way that I think it kind of plays out in reality is that we're in a time of immense change. We're in a climate and biodiversity crisis. We really need collaboration to solve these issues. And there's a lot of research around the fact that women are really effective collaborators and communicators. And actually, their scientific understanding is ability to comprehend that knowledge or those complex issues isn't any less than men's. But perhaps just because of how we are raised and culturally, women are fantastic collaborators. And that doesn't mean that men can't be, but there's a different culture around how men interact currently, which hopefully one day will change. But at the moment, we need that collaboration and that communication to make sure that the science is communicated to policymakers, members of the community, fishers, industry partners. We all need to tackle these issues together. And so collaboration and communication is so key. And that is something that we can all do and all have the possibility to do, but it's something that we can currently learn from women.
Yeah, I love that point. I think it is definitely something that we've evolved to be really good at because of the kind of situations we're put in a lot of the times. I guess kind of to round things off a bit, I wondered if you'd be able to give a piece of advice firstly to a young girl going into this industry, what can help them succeed, and then also to a young boy or young man in the industry and advice for them in terms of making sure that the space is open to everybody coming into it.
So I would say for young women coming into this space, don't be scared to try your strength. I think we give opportunities for men and young men to practice and to try things. And women get one shot. And if they don't succeed the first time, they often aren't given a second shot. And so there's a reluctance to even try until you're ready. And that really sets you back. So whether it's you're on a boat and you just want to try and pull up a net, but you're not sure if you'll be able, just do it. And then insist that you get an opportunity to try again, because you won't be inherently given it when somebody else might be. So I think my advice would be to take up space. You have just as much right as anyone else to be in that space. It's a privilege to be able to be in marine science, and it's not one everyone gets the opportunity to have. So if you've managed to make it there, make the most of it and try not to, easier said than done, get beaten down by comments or attitudes from other people. And for advice for a young man in that space in terms of making cultural change, I think lift up the work of female researchers when you see it, and make sure if you have the power at any point to assign keynotes for a conference or represent a group in any space, make sure that group is representative of the people working in that field at all levels and across all demographics, whether that be gender, sexuality, ethnicity. Make sure that everybody gets a fair stab at it, even if they're not the most qualified for the position, because in order to be the best that they can be, they need to be given a chance.
I do think like we get drilled into us a sense of perfectionism as women, that we have to do it perfectly right. Otherwise, it's an example of giving the chance to a woman and it not being worth it. And that chance is, wasted essentially. And then like people will just revert back to the decisions they know are comfortable and safe. There's a lot of pressure, I think, we put on ourselves as women. Which kind of feeds back into that sense of like needing to overachieve to get the same recognition.
And actually, it's unlikely that you are in life able to be perfect, but especially when you're in a condition that isn't, or a situation that isn't built for you. You're on a boat with men that you are, potentially because of your hormones or the contraception that you're having to take or whatever the situation, more nauseous. There's no bathroom for you to use. So you're battling, doing work whilst you're really needing to go to the bathroom, all of those things.
Yeah.
I've worked in the Middle East where you're needing to be covered, so you're much hotter, you're risking dehydration when men aren't. Yeah, there's a lot that you're having to deal with that maybe not all other people in that situation are. So perfection is a lot to ask.
Yeah, it's true. I find it so interesting. Sorry, this is a slight tangent, but I did some philosophy of science when I was at uni, and about how male the pursuit of science is, and they're looking for like the great man theory within experiments. And I just think it's so interesting how women approach science and how different the whole scientific sphere and like the way we conduct things would be if it was primarily started from a place where women were leading. Like, what would those two worlds look like? I just find it so intriguing.
And the culture of it in terms of academia and research can be really toxic spaces that completely lack, despite the high pressure, completely lack empathy a lot of times. And this isn't the case for all male research groups, and it's not better in all female-led research groups, but there certainly are examples now of emerging female principal investigators that are leading with empathy and taking into account the mental health of the postgraduate students in their groups, and you really see the cultural difference.
Yeah, it's so powerful when people are given a space to do things differently and you can see the positive effects of it. It really gives, I guess, hope to a better way of how things can be changed for the better.
Yeah, for sure. The only way is up, hopefully.
Oh, that was such a lovely discussion. Oh, thanks so much for your time, George. It's
Thank
been
you. It's been lovely to meet you.
perfect. Have a lovely rest of your day and a good weekend.
You too.
Thanks. Thanks so
You're
much.
a star. Thanks, Eva.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the first episode in our Women in Marine STEM series. Join us next week to hear from Marianne Glasgott, a researcher who entered the field after a career in industry, bringing a unique perspective on where the sector stands on equality and what still needs to change.